Well, you're going to laugh, but because of your podcast, we're positioned well. So I don't know how else to thank you, but thank you. Your podcast and your services are amazing, and I wish I could do more as far as working with you guys, but I haven't really, but maybe in the future, obviously. But once again, our family is grateful to you, and your services and your information is priceless. Thank you so much. Take care.
Welcome to this week's edition of Flashback Friday, your opportunity to get some good review by listening to episodes from the past that Jason has handpicked to help you today in the present and propel you into the future. Enjoy.
Speakers, publishers, consultants, coaches, and info marketers unite. The Speaking of Wealth Show is your roadmap to success and significance. Learn the latest tools, technologies, and tactics to get more bookings, sell more products, and attract more clients. If you're looking to increase your direct response sales, create a big-time personal brand, and become the go-to guru, the Speaking of Wealth Show is for you. Here's your host, Jason Hartman.
Welcome to the Speaking of Wealth Show. This is your host, Jason Hartman, where we discuss profit strategies for speakers, publishers, authors, consultants, coaches, info marketers, and just go over a whole bunch of exciting things that you can use to increase your business, to make your business more successful and more passive and more automated and more scalable. So we will be back with a great interview. Be sure to visit us at speakingofwealth.com. You can take advantage of our blog, subscribe to the RSS feed, and many other resources for free at speakingofwealth.com. And we will be back with a great interview for you in less than 60 seconds.
I've never really thought of Jason as subversive, but I just found out that's what Wall Street considers him to be.
Really? Now, how is that possible at all?
Simple. Wall Street believes that real estate investors are dangerous to their schemes because the dirty truth about income property is that it actually works in real life.
I know. I mean, how many people do you know, not including insiders, who created wealth with stocks, bonds, and mutual funds? Those options are for people who only want to pretend they're getting ahead.
Stocks and other non-direct traded assets are a losing game for most people. The typical scenario is you make a little, you lose a little, and spin your wheels for decades.
That's because the corporate crooks running the stock and bond investing game will always see to it that they win. This means, unless you're one of them, you will not win.
And unluckily for Wall Street, Jason has a unique ability to make the everyday person understand investing the way it should be. He shows them a world where anything less than a 26% annual return is disappointing.
Yep, and that's why Jason offers a one-book set on creating wealth that comes with 20 digital download audios. He shows us how we can be excited about these scary times and exploit the incredible opportunities this present economy has afforded us.
We can pick local markets untouched by the economic downturn, exploit packaged commodities investing, and achieve exceptional returns safely and securely.
I like how he teaches you how to protect the equity in your home before it disappears and how to outsource your debt obligations to the government.
And this set of advanced strategies for wealth creation is being offered for only $197.
To get your Creating Wealth Encyclopedia Book 1, complete with over 20 hours of audio, go to jasonhartman.com/store.
If you want to be able to sit back and collect checks every month, just like a banker, Jason's Creating Wealth Encyclopedia series is for you.
It's my pleasure to welcome James Altucher to the show. He is Managing Director of Formula Capital, founder of Stockpickr. He is the writer of Altucher Confidential and author of the new Choose Yourself, Be Happy, Make Millions, Live the Dream, as well as 10 other books, some self-published, some with big-name publishers. And so we'll talk about that today. James, welcome. How are you?
Great, Jason. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and I should say to our listeners for this show, the Speaking of Wealth show, that we had you on my Creating Wealth show, and you were a fascinating guest talking about Wall Street and investing and your investment philosophies and economic outlook, and that was just a great interview. And if you're interested in those topics, go check out that show as well, because James was a great guest. But we want to talk now about the world of publishing and why you made the conscious decision to self-publish and how your publishers would love to have you back and publish your more recent books through their companies. But you didn't go that route. Why not?
Well, first, a lot of people think the decision is between publishing with a mainstream publisher and self-publishing, but that's not really the important decision at all. That might have been the important decision like 2 years ago, but this is an industry that's moving very fast. And so the real decision is, do you want to publish professionally or unprofessionally? There are many ways to publish unprofessionally, even with the highest brow, most traditional publishers. No matter where you go, they're going to tell you, we'll edit your book, we'll market your book, we'll design your book, but there's very few good editors, marketers, and designers. So they may be with the traditional publishers, but they're more likely now starting to move out of the traditional publishing industry and offer their services independently. So my last book's a great example where I feel like I professionally published and I beat the mainstream publishers at their own game. So the book's called Choose Yourself. The foreword's by Dick Costello, who's the CEO of Twitter. I hired a great designer for the cover. He had designed many bestsellers before. I had hired a great editor. He had edited many best-selling authors. I hired a good interior design company. I hired a great marketing agency that had marketed many best-selling authors. So I was putting together it was almost like I was putting together my own mini publishing company to publish my own book.
I kind of liken it to being, if you want to build a house, for example, you can hire a contractor and they will hire all the subcontractors and manage them for you. Theoretically, they will.
Right.
That's open to debate maybe. And you're basically being your own contractor and you hired all the subs yourself, right?
Right. And so I will say it's a lot of work. Now, obviously, it would have been more work if I decided to edit my own book and design my own book and market my own book. But a lot of people simply just, when they self-publish, they just upload to Amazon and then it's published. And then they wonder, well, how can I sell more copies of my book? You have to prepare months in advance. This was a 7-month process of really making sure this book was professionally done in every level. I mean, I probably rewrote it 20 times thanks to the pushing of the editors that I had hired. I had went over not hundreds of designs, but dozens of designs. With marketing, I probably had a spreadsheet of about 50 different marketing things I was going to do, and I would track then how sales were going depending on which marketing event I was doing, and so on. So it was a lot of work for me. I had probably have never done this much work on a book, even when I was professionally publishing. Probably because the professional publishers, the traditional publishers, kept claiming they would do all these things, but they wouldn't really do it as well as I would do it. Now, I know how to run a business, so I knew how I wanted to publish my book. And the results have been great. I mean, I put out a fair amount of money, but I made that all back within the first week of my book's release. My book was on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It's still a bestseller. 4 weeks later, I'm still in the top 100 on Amazon, which means for nonfiction, I'm probably in the top 10 or the top 20. On Kindle, I'm still ranked number 1 for all of my categories. So my book's still a success, and it's still selling, tons of copies every day. And now it's only been a month, so we'll see. But everything's been going really well, and there's been it's already my best-selling book.
Okay,
out of 11
so
books.
a couple comments on Choose Yourself, which is your latest book that you're talking about. So on Amazon, you got 4.5 stars and 95 reviews. That's a lot of reviews. I mean, some very controversial books will get more than that, but 95 reviews for a 1-month-old book is pretty good. So congratulations on that, and 4.5 stars with that many reviews. But also, one comment. You have, I guess, made the choice, probably very consciously, and I want you to talk to us about this, to price your Kindle books pretty low, well, in most cases, except for Trade Like a Hedge Fund, which is very expensive on Kindle. But the other one's much less expensive than mainstream publishers.
Well, yes and no, because don't forget with a mainstream publisher, your royalty on a Kindle might be 10%. So if a book is $15
You're
on
only getting a
Kindle and
buck 50.
you're
Yeah.
getting $1.50, but on Amazon, when I'm charging $4.99 for a book, I'm getting a $3.50 royalty. So I'm actually getting a much better royalty than you would get with traditional publishers. Now the difference is I didn't get an advance from a traditional publisher, but advances are steadily declining across the entire industry. Now, the other thing I don't get is I don't get distribution in Barnes and Noble. But, there's no more Barnes and Nobles in San Francisco. The Barnes and Nobles are closing every day in New York City. And even when I was with traditional publishers, I found they would put my books on the coasts, but the Barnes and Noble would only put the best-selling books, best-selling romance novels, if you're not on one of the coasts or Chicago. So I wasn't really getting mainstream distribution from mainstream publishers anyway. Now, I could have hired a distribution arm of like Simon and Schuster to distribute my books, but that would have slowed things down even further, and I didn't want to do that. And Amazon's always been the bulk of my sales, no matter what, anyway. So I decided to just focus on Amazon. And look, even just focusing on that, this is 4 weeks in. This has sold more than all of my other books. There's not a single book that's come close to this one.
Did you give us a number on sales 4 weeks in? Do you want to share that?
No, I didn't. But it's it's a little over 30,000.
And that includes paper and Kindle?
Yes.
Now what's the
And that
ratio there?
includes audio.
Uh-huh. Oh, paper, Kindle, and audio. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the ratio on your paper versus Kindle versus audio there, if you know it?
I would say, I mean, I'm just thinking of today's numbers. It's probably about 2/3 Kindle, 1/3 paperback, and then audio could be dilute that number. The audio could be like another 5 to 10%. And then there's some international sales too.
Right.
I've
And
already
on your audio, you did your own narration too, I see.
I did the own narration. I booked the studio. It was the same studio President Clinton did his book in. So every step of the way, I did this completely professionally. Nobody can fault the professionalism, and that's why I beat the mainstream publishers at their own game. I mean, there were 2 days when the book was first released where I was the #1 book on all Amazon for nonfiction, and like I said, still. The #1 for my categories. No mainstream publisher is even close to me in my specific categories. So, again, I think that this one book proves that if you want to make the most money and if you want to beat the publishers, professionally self-publish is probably the best way to do it. Now, people can say, well, I'll tell you the cost. It cost me probably about $23,000 to do this. So again, I made that money back the first week. So even if you don't have the money for it, it's not so bad to spend the money and make an investment in yourself. And if you feel you have a popular topic, to put the book out that way and make the money back. And I'm going to be, my final profit on this is going to be many multiples of that. It already is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that doesn't include the ancillary stuff, I assume. I mean, you're doing speaking engagements, and then you've got certainly you'll probably have more books coming out, but maybe not in your case, but in other aspiring authors' cases, they have upsell products, they have events, coaching, I don't know.
Yeah. So for many authors, they do have that. I don't specifically, but I do expect I'll sell probably well over 100,000 copies of this book in the long run. And I've already sold the foreign rights to the book to Taiwan, Korea, and Brazil. So that by itself paid back my initial upfront cost. So, and again, I've never had a book that was on any of the bestseller lists before. This book hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. To reach the New York Times bestseller list, you only need to sell about 2,500 copies your first week. And I sold probably 8,000 or 9,000 copies my first week. So, but unfortunately, the New York Times doesn't look at self-published books. That's the other thing I gave up, was that I could be on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, but not the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, that's very interesting.
But if I was on the New York Times list, I probably would have been #1 or #2 for nonfiction.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very interesting. So can you break down those costs a little bit for us, James? Cover design, how much did you spend there? Editor, how much there? How much for interior design of the book? But what you didn't mention in the 23,000 number was your own time, of course.
Yes, and that for any author, your own time, it never pays for itself on writing a book. So you write a book for other reasons, unless you're going to sell millions of copies. But the editor I used, Niels Parker, who has edited, as an example, all of Tucker Max's bestsellers. I mean, Tucker Max's books have probably spent 200 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and they were all edited by Niels Parker. He cost $5,000. The Audible cost about $2,000, maybe $100 more. I forget.
With you being the narrator.
Yes, with me being the narrator, and I feel with me being the narrator, I also did it unabridged, so I could tell my own stories. It didn't necessarily. It's a completely independent work of art. Say, like I didn't follow the text exactly, and so that cost about 2,100. The marketing agency cost $5,000, and I'm probably going to continue working with him, so it will cost a little bit more money over time. Interior design, I forget the exact number, so forgive me, cost a few $1,000s. And a video trailer, which I actually think in retrospect I probably didn't need, cost $7,000. So that was the most expensive aspect, actually, and I probably didn't need it.
Right, right. And with all of those things and those different service providers, if you want to mention any names, feel free to. I'll leave that up to you. But, if you feel anyone did a great job and you want to.
Oh yeah, and everybody did a great job. So I should have mentioned Ryan Holiday, who was the marketing expert behind the book marketing. He's marketed, very good guy. He's marketed Tim Ferriss's recent bestseller, The 4 Hour Chef. He's marketed Robert Greene's books, the most recent book, Mastery, and the prior book, The 50th Law, both of which were New York Times bestsellers. He's also marketed Tucker Max's books. He marketed John Romaniello's recent bestseller, number one bestseller, Man 2.0. So he does a lot of very good books. He's very smart, very creative. I also have experience marketing books, having done so many books, but he was a good person to work with and to, bounce ideas off of and to get his ideas, and our networks overlapped, but he also knew people I didn't know and vice versa, and it worked out very well. It worked out extremely well.
But that's the same. Is that the same Ryan Holiday who wrote Trust Me, I'm Lying?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
So
fantastic book, by the way. Yeah,
yeah, it
very
was a very
interesting.
good book, and he's not a liar. Like he actually doesn't like that title.
Right, right.
He's a very good guy.
It's a
He's
catchy title, though. You gotta
yeah.
you gotta pander to the market a little bit. Yeah.
It's funny actually. My one of my last traditional publishers was the publisher of that book. But his subtitle though was a little better, which is Confessions of a Media Manipulator. Like he knows basically how to hit the media for different messages, and we constructed a lot of good marketing messages out of my book, and he was able to execute on that, him and his team. So they were well worth it. I actually think they undercharged, and I've told them that. So yeah, so I mentioned Niels, I mentioned Ryan. I actually forgot the name of the designers, but I'm going to blog about it at some point. But I use an interior design company. I also used a company managed by Tucker Max called Lioncrest, which helped me coordinate all these different. He introduced me to all these different experts, and he helped me coordinate the whole process.
Fantastic. And did you ever release in hardback or just paperback for the paper editions?
I do a hardback in special edition. So I had one company that ordered 5,000 copies in hardcover, and Amazon was able to fulfill that order for me, although it's not something you can order off the website.
Okay.
So I have a very good relationship with Amazon, and I was able to call them and ask for this special order, and they delivered.
Okay, fantastic. And tell us a little bit about the book, if you would, because the book really, in itself, relates to the topics about which we're talking. When we talk about disintermediation, like we did a little bit before we started the actual show, the book addresses some of these things. I mean, tell us about the actual book.
I mean, the book starts off at a point where I was kind of like darkest in my life, where I had lost so much money that I was practically suicidal, and I had to figure out how to come back from this, and nobody was going to help me come back. I realized very quickly I had to figure it out for myself, how to what worked well when I was making money and what stopped working when I was losing money. And what I determined that the best way I could choose and help myself was to be healthy. So I had to be physically healthy, which means it's very simple and it's all the common sense stuff, but sleeping well, eating well, exercising well. I had to be emotionally healthy, which means coming to grips with who the negative people in my life were and who the positive people, and focusing time mostly on the positive people in my life, the ones who inspired me and who made me feel good about myself. I had to be around, I had to be mentally healthy, which means get rid of all kind of quote unquote junk food for the brain, like bad TV and bad news and web surfing and all that, but focus on reading quality books. And also, most importantly, I had to write down 10 ideas a day. Not so much to have a good idea, but to exercise the idea muscle so I could become an idea machine. And I write down 10 ideas every day. I throw out the ideas. None of them are good, but the idea machine gets exercise and I start churning out good ideas in the long run. And then spiritually healthy, it's very important for me every day to be grateful for the abundance in my life. Whether I feel intellectually whether I'm abundant or not, spiritually I always am. And it's much better to feel that sense in your body that you're grateful than to feel anxious or regretful because those hurt the body, but feeling gratitude helps the body. And doing just these four things, people always say to me, I'm stuck. I can't get out of a hole. Don't worry about all that. If you just take a step back and just do these four things, if you build the foundation, you could then build the house on top of it. And that's what you only have to focus on is that foundation. And then the rest really does happen magically. Opportunities start to present themselves, and you have the good enough sense to know which opportunities are good and which are bad. But you have to really, with discipline, do this daily practice. And then I give stories about how it worked for me, and I tell stories of how it worked for others. And I go over a lot of common myths in self help about what self improvement means. So a big part of the book also is I kind of analyze and debunk various myths within the self-help or self-improvement industry.
So, in debunking some of those common self help myths, one of them was procrastination. We normally think of procrastination as a bad thing. I remember I bought a book on procrastination once, but decided I'd read it later, just fooling around. But is procrastination okay sometimes, or tell us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so often procrastination actually could be a very successful way to achieve many goals. So we have that primary goal that we're procrastinating, but there's always a lot of secondary goals. So whenever I feel like I'm procrastinating on my primary goal, I try to achieve as many secondary goals as possible. So I find procrastination, when used effectively, can be very productive. The other thing is, if there's something that's causing us to procrastinate, it's often our body's way of telling us that we might not this might be a bad idea, our primary goal. We might not want to do this primary goal. So it's very important for people to listen to what their body is telling them on procrastination.
So, James, one of the chapters in your book is it doesn't cost a lot to make $1 billion. That's a pretty catchy title. Tell us what you mean about it.
Well, a couple things. One is a lot of people, particularly young entrepreneurs, think they're going to create the next Facebook or the next Google. This is actually incredibly hard to do. So you can't go out there with the expectation to make $1 billion, but you can go out there and say, look, I'm going to make a good, profitable business because I'm going to solve a problem. Now, whether this turns out to be $1 million business, a $10 million business, a $100 million business, this is a little bit out of your control. It just depends on how big the market is. Nobody really knows in advance how big a brand new market is, but it depends on how big the market is, how much you're going to work, and so on. Keep in mind, it's just as good for most people to build $1 million business. That's great for 99.9% of people. Make $1 million. Don't always go crazy trying to make $1 billion. But that particular chapter is about Sarah Blakely, who created Spanx. So that's that kind of undergarments that hold things together basically for women.
Yeah, those are very popular. And now they have them for men too, even.
And she I kind of use her as an example because I feel like inadvertently she had used many of the ideas that I talk about in terms of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. It's sort of, she was so focused on these things that it almost became like money was an afterthought for her. And, a funny story is when her fiance proposed to her, she had to kind of finally tell him, I think you should know, I don't just have like a small business, but this business is worth $1 billion. And, obviously he was pleasantly surprised, but that's how much of an afterthought the actual money was for her. She started off very early reading like self-help books and Wayne Dyer books and trying to improve herself. She was very good at sales, so she always tried to analyze not what her problems were, but what the other person's problems were and how she could solve them. She had no shame in that. She would do a lot of preparation, so she would, and preparation involves having a very strong idea muscle because you have to constantly read and study your clients and your potential customers. So, again, she was very focused on delivering value rather than making a billion. And I think she achieved her goals. So that was very important. And in that chapter, I give more examples of how she did this, but I think that's a very good example to study.
I love your chapter titles here. Was the editor a big part of coming up with your chapter titles, or are you just really good at writing catchy headlines like that?
I think the titles is more me than the editor. The editor really helped though with the flow from chapter to chapter, and he did a very good job.
Great. Good stuff. How about the curious case of the sexy image? Since we're talking about Spanx, we'll tie it in with that one.
That's a funny one because I had written some articles, and sometimes when I'm doing articles, I'll just pull images off Pinterest and put them in the articles. And I'd pulled these several articles in a row. I'd pulled this kind of the same, or the image of the same woman doing these yoga poses on a beach. And then suddenly she emailed me and said someone forwarded my articles to her. And I got a little nervous, like, oh my gosh, is she going to be upset I use these images of her? And she turned out to be incredibly generous and let me use the images. And she told me her story, how she had come from a position where she was very physically unhealthy, but through, again, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual work, she had basically become this incredible yoga instructor. And she has a site, Dashama, Dashama .org or dashama.com. I forget the exact URL. And she let me use her images and she told me her story. And she told me something that's actually very useful that's unrelated to yoga. But in general, when responding to comments, we all get hate comments on the internet because that's partially the role of the internet is to spew up the most hate it possibly can. And she said something very interesting. She said basically, when you get any comments, assume that 1/3 of your comments are going to be positive, 1/3 are going to be neutral, and 1/3 of the people are going to hate you. Just assume that automatically off the top, and that turns out to be a pretty accurate ratio. So I'm grateful for her for many reasons, and that's one of them.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, James, now just to understand, is it you have 11 books, and the last 6 of them are self-published?
Yes.
Okay, so you really left the traditional publishing world. How long ago was that you consciously made that decision to self-publish? When was that 6th book?
I think the first self-published book I did was in 2010.
Okay. Oh, so fairly recent then, actually. Yeah.
Yes, it's been very successful. My self-published books have more than outsold my mainstream published books. But again, the most important thing I've done was to change how I was looking at it and to professionally publish instead of unprofessionally publish. So this last book is the first book out of all 11 which I feel was professionally published. And I prove that because I beat the publishers in every category that I focused on, including all of nonfiction for a while. So I'm very pleased with the result.
Fantastic. Well, good for you. Well, give out your website if you would. And of course, the books are available on Amazon, as we mentioned, with very good reviews and good sales as well. But give out your website if you would so people can learn more about you.
Sure. It's James Altucher, ALTUCHER.com. And that's where my blog is. And I kind of tell personal stories there every day or so. And on Twitter, you can follow me at @JAltucher. And of course, the book is Choose Yourself, and you can find it on Amazon along with all my other books.
Fantastic. James Altucher, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing these insights. And congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company, all rights reserved. For distribution or publication rights and media interviews, please visit www.hartmanmedia.com or email media@hartmanmedia.com. Nothing on this show should be considered specific personal or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and the host is acting on behalf of Platinum Properties Investor Network, Inc. exclusively.